DeSean Jackson of Delaware State. I like it, but then I don't like it. I don't know. The whole thing has me a tad bit conflicted. Oh, yeah. It's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter. @SouthExclusives starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. And if you're new to FanDuel, you get $250 back in bonus bets if you put down a $5 winning bet. Now, you know the deal. DeSean Jackson has been hired by Delaware State as their new head football coach. We'll wrap up Delaware State's 2024 season as a part of our season in review series, and we'll also preview this hiring. I am conflicted. I am a tad bit confused on how to feel about this, and it's all based off of which angle I decide to view the hiring from. In segment 2, I'll look at the Delaware State side of it from a university standpoint and why they will make this hire, and I actually like it from there. But when we talk about DeSean Jackson and his motivations, that's where I become a tad bit hesitant. That's where I sit back and I say, why? Why would DeSean Jackson want to take this job? Now, you can go back and you can look at the history of, and I want to say the recent history, because there's always been NFL players who come back and work at HBCUs. But I'd say over the last 3 to 4 years, those who do it have a tad bit of a different feel to it. So I would say post-prime, you look at Deion Sanders, Eddie George. I'm going to keep Eddie Robinson out of it because I don't really feel like he fits with those guys. He's more like Chris Dishman, who also played a good amount of time in the league and then came to an HBCU. It is different. So I'm going to take Eddie Robinson, put him aside. You have Deion Sanders, Eddie George, now Michael Vick, and DeSean Jackson starting in the same year. And I'll tell you the truth. This is the first time that I ever looked at the NFL player to HBCU pipeline, and I joined the other side of the coin. Most times I'm championing it. I had no problem with the Deion Sanders hiring. I had no problem with a lot of the things with Deion Sanders at Jackson State. If we're going to be completely honest about it, let's give the God's honest truth here. Eddie George, I was a fan of that too. I came on here and I championed Michael Vick. I can't come on with a true spirit and tell you that I feel the same way about the DeSean Jackson to Delaware State because it makes me wonder why. I know what he represents for them, which is what I'll get to in segment 2. But DeSean Jackson, why would you take this job? It's the first time that I ever looked at any of those 4 men that I named and said, oh, you think it's sweet. I ain't feel that way about Sanders, about George, about Vick. But when it came to Jackson, because I just don't know where this came from. DeSean Jackson coaching, being a head coach, in my opinion, was so random that I have to question the motivations. It'd be irresponsible for me not to wonder where this came from. This whole, I think I seen a report that it was his dream to coach at an HBCU. I don't know. I don't know about that. I think it's cool to say now, and it makes it where, oh, you got to accept it. I don't have to accept that. And I really don't. I genuinely do not look at that. So I would argue that DeSean Jackson's hiring is actually indicative of some of the negative rhetoric that I don't subscribe to about the Deion Sanders situation. I think it actually applies to DeSean Jackson. See, 2 of the bigger things that they said is that Deion Sanders had no coaching resume, and then also he used Jackson State as a trampoline. I don't necessarily subscribe to either one of those narratives. I had my problems about his departure and everything at the time. I kind of have them now, but I also don't really care. It didn't have that hold on me to still feel that way after a certain amount of time. I just acknowledged something I didn't like and moved on. But when you look at Jackson, there is no real resume. I don't like the term trampoline. I don't like that. I think it's kind of an entitled term, to be honest. I think it's an entitled term that suggests or insinuates that coach needs to be here, all about here, and not try to progress forward. If that's that person's dream, that's that person's dream. The thing about this is I wouldn't use the word trampoline, but the sentiments of how they talked about that and how they use that word, I would use here. Because, like I said, this is the first time that I saw. It's just me. Let me know. I love when y'all talk to me. So let me know what you think. This is the first time that I've seen an NFL player go to an HBCU, and I felt that person felt this was finna be sweet. I can't help but think that DeSean Jackson saw what Deion Sanders did, said, oh, okay, yeah, I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to the MEAC. I'm going to go ahead and take over and get to the FBS level in a couple of years. I can't help but think he felt that way. I don't think that's happening. First off, you're not Deion Sanders. Secondly, I don't think you're going to come in and dominate like that. There was a resume for Deion. There was this idea that he stepped in with a naked resume. Could he have gotten a job elsewhere? Probably not. I don't think so. I think that it took Jackson State, and not HBCUs, Jackson State, to make that leap of faith and say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and take a chance. Now it's opened the door and the floodgates for it to happen elsewhere. But it had to take one person to do it, and that one person happened to be Jackson State. Okay? So that is true, but he was coaching high school for years. DeSean Jackson doesn't really have a coaching resume. DeSean Jackson has been an assistant coach for 1 year on the high school level. I tried to Google camps, and I don't see any consistent camps happening at this time over a course of years. I've seen some in the past, but not any currently going on. That's just through my Googles, just to be clear. But limited coaching resume, doesn't seem to be doing a lot of camps. The transition to coaching just doesn't make that much sense to me. I'll be waiting to hear his introductory press conference to see how this came about, why he decided he wanted to take this job. I think why DeSean Jackson is a completely different question, and I don't have the answer to that. I think it's a legit question of why would you hire him specifically? Like, what made that the guy? Because DeSean Jackson doesn't check off any of the boxes that I'm really looking at. We went through the coaching resume. DeSean Jackson doesn't have a connection to Delaware by my estimations. DeSean Jackson's closest connection to Delaware is that he played in Washington, D.C., and he played in Baltimore. Now, I know they're close geographically, but is it enough to feel like, oh, yeah, he's connected to Delaware? I'll let somebody from that area tell me. From how I feel, I would say no. That's how I would feel. Like, I live in Texas. I'm not connected to Oklahoma, right? Like, if I went and got the Oklahoma State job, if I went and got a Langston job, you couldn't say, oh, well, he is from neighboring Texas. I don't think you could do that. So that's the way that I look at it. The whole thing about DeSean Jackson is confusing. His lead up to wanting to become a coach, I don't know. It makes me feel like he thinks it's sweet. It makes me feel like he thinks it's going to be easy. You're looking at his connection to Delaware State. Non-existent. So I don't know, man. I don't know. It's just a lot of things that has me a tad bit skeptical about what his motivations are. It has me skeptical. And when we get to the introductory press conference, I will revisit this conversation. This conversation must be revisited at some time because I don't really like coming on here and talking negatively. And I tried to have a positive spin on it from his point of view, and I just couldn't. And I thought it'd be disrespectful and disingenuous to come to you and try to give you this yippee when I ain't how I'm feeling inside. That's not how I'm feeling about this topic. How I'm feeling about this topic is that DeSean Jackson, a person with no real coaching resume, who is an assistant coach on a high school level in Los Angeles, California, where he's from. Him coming to Delaware State, there's no geographical connection. I don't understand why that was the case. I see Eddie George to Tennessee State. I see Michael Vick to Norfolk State. I get it. Those make sense. Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders. Him going anywhere was logical. DeSean Jackson, on the other hand, I don't get the connection to Delaware. I don't see the history of coaching. I don't see the things that makes me feel like he wants to step into this position. So when I don't see those things, the only thing I can assume until I get more information is that he thinks that this is an easy lick, that he thinks he's about to go into the MEAC and win in a couple years, maybe dominate for a couple years. I don't see that happening, but that's what he thinks. I've gone on a tangent about how I don't like his motivations, how I'm skeptical about his motivations, but at the same time, I like it for Delaware State. Whatever his motivations are, I like it for Delaware State. That's the confliction, and that's what I want to continue to explore as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did you know that Rocket Money helps you find subscriptions that you forgot about, that you were paying for twice? That actually happens to some people, believe it or not. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't realize I was still paying for from my college days. It's like having your own personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. We all want that. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, or goals that you want to hit that year. Coming into the new year, that's extremely important. And you see, it saves up to not 740 million, but $740 a year for all of the customers. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That is rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/locked on. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're checking out Spencer McLaughlin. That is Locked On College Football. We're going to go into the new week, right? Not this weekend, but the new week, the next week, however you want to phrase it. And we're going to have the college football playoffs on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So go ahead and check out Spencer McLaughlin so he can go ahead and get you ready for all of that. I want to take a look at the other side of this coin. The other side of this is, what does it mean for Delaware State? And I like it. I like it. If we're looking at DeSean Jackson's motivations, skepticism. If we're looking at what this could do for Delaware State, I'm happy. I'm excited. This is I think, personally, Delaware State is the type of school to make this move because it's a very low risk for them. I say all of this about DeSean Jackson. I say all of this, but I don't blame Delaware State for the decision that they made. Matter of fact, I champion for them. I champion that for them because when you look at where they were, what do they have to lose? I'll say this. Delaware State was largely irrelevant in 2024 because they were unsuccessful, and most unsuccessful teams are not relevant. Even in a 6-team conference, it's still difficult to be relevant when you're bad. They won't have that problem this year. I don't know if they'll be good or bad. We'll see. But they'll be relevant. The hiring of DeSean Jackson elevates their profile instantly. Instantly elevates the profile. And honestly, I thought that this was a huge gamble at first. I'll take you through my thought process. My first thought process was, dang, I had a whole show planned out and now I got to switch. That was my first thought process, but that's cool. I wasn't tripping off it too much. Because it was still relatively early in the day that this happened. But Monday, Jackson State season in review. See you there. My first thought was, DeSean Jackson? He's coaching? That was my first thought. Just be honest with you. My second thought was, I don't know. Why would Delaware State do this? That was my second thought. I was on a walk, so I had a little bit of time. I was just walking and I was talking with somebody. So I was kind of talking this out. And my third thought was, you know what? This makes sense for them. The same way I looked at Norfolk State and I said they needed somebody with a little bit of stature. And that could have been a very established head coach, or it could have been the Michael Vick route. for Delaware State, they needed somebody like DeSean Jackson. I'm still curious on why it's specifically DeSean Jackson, because that's just so random. That's just so random to me. I never thought about him being in coaching. But at the same time, I get it, what he represents for them. What he represents for the Hornets is a former NFL player who has notoriety to a degree. When you look at the four men that I've identified that fit this mold, the four men who I have identified that fit this criteria, he's the only one from this era. He's the only one who I think that these high school players could legitimately remember. You got to think about it, man. Michael Vick was really done in 2012. He stayed in the league for a couple of years as a backup, and Michael Vick, but did you really experience Michael Vick? I don't necessarily know if these kids did. I'm looking at it this way. You were, let's say you're 20 years old. So you were born in 2004. By the time you hit 10 years old, the only person you could see was DeSean Jackson. You still got that Washington Tampa Bay run, which was pretty solid. I would say his tail off was his secondary Philadelphia run. I'll say that's when the numbers really start dropping if you're just looking at statistics. But he stayed one of the guys that he was always a threat. He was always a threat. But at 10 years old, you might not care about the guy who was always a threat if you didn't see him when he was like, But that idea that, if they're 18 years old, they still probably caught a little bit of DeSean Jackson playing in the league. There's 18, let's say it's 2024 right now. You were born in 2006. 2016, you were 10 years old. You were able to experience DeSean Jackson. I think that helps. I don't know what this does nationwide compared to his peers. I'm unsure about that. Time will have to tell. This is really the most interesting one to me because I just don't know what the gravitational pull of DeSean Jackson is. That's not something I've evaluated yet. But I do know he has the cachet of being an NFL player that honestly a lot of these players probably saw, and they know how good he was. They didn't have to hear about it. Everybody else, you kind of had to hear about it, or you had to go look up highlights, but you saw how good DeSean Jackson was. That was a little bit different. And we're getting younger and younger. Look at it. Deion Sanders, Eddie George, that's from a previous generation. That's a little young for me, or a little older for me. Michael Vick, I was able to see Vick. I was able to see Vick before. I was see his Atlanta days, and I was able to see him in his Philadelphia days, right? So I saw all of that from Michael Vick. But with DeSean Jackson, everybody's seen him. He retired in 2022, so he's not that far removed from the game. But what about on the field? Because that's what really all comes down to. What about on the field? On the field, let's play out the two scenarios. I said that I think he thinks it's an easy lick. Let's say he's correct. You go to Delaware State for 3-4 years, you dominate, and you move on. If Delaware State is able to be dominant for 3 to 4 years, it's one of the best years that they've had in a long time, one of the best stretches they've had in a long time. You got to remember, this is the same Delaware State University that has not had a winning season in over a decade. So you'll take the 3 to 4 stretch. If he's here for a good time, not a long time, like Drake said, then hey, you're going to take that. But if he's only here for 3 to 4 years and it crashes and burns, I kind of feel like who cares? Because Delaware State hasn't been good in over a decade. So when you've had such low success, why not take the gamble? If you've had such low success for such a long period of time, why not take the risk of saying, you know what? Let's take a flyer on this guy with no coaching experience. We've seen how it worked. And I've heard a head coach say college is all about recruiting, and the idea of getting an NFL player to come to your HBCU who has a little bit of name status, who people can remember, and people who can identify with the league. These younger players can identify them with the league. That should help your recruiting. That is the principle. That is the thought. And I can't really be mad at it. So as you push forward, I think I hit every benchmark that I wanted to hit on that. That's my confliction. That's my confliction on everything of just. Also, I don't know if the expectations get higher. Just for the record, I don't know if hiring DeSean Jackson makes your expectations shoot through the roof. Same with Michael Vick. I don't know if either one of those hires really makes you say, yeah, you got to go win the MEAC now. You should win the MEAC. You should be number 2. I don't know if that's the case. It's still show and prove. It's still hesitancy. I don't know. That's my idea. We will talk about this at another time. I'm gonna wait till his introductory press conference, and then we really gonna get it going. But we'll have to wait until that does happen before that's even announced, right? So we'll be back at this, guys. We'll be back, I promise. Now, as we push forward, we're gonna look at Delaware State season in review. Quite frankly, when you win one game, it's not much season to review, but we're gonna do that and look at the one, not game they won, but the one star on the team that is Jaden Sutton as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel, that's where you need to go if you're trying to make a little bit more money going into the new year. Let's say that you've been waiting all year and your New Year's resolution is that you are going to start using sports gambling, or that's just something you want to change up in 2025. My suggestion is, why wait? Why wait? We have college football. First of all, we have pro football tomorrow. Trio. I'm talking about a triple header of banger. It's banger after banger after banger after banger. Oh my God. I can't wait to sit on my couch and not move all day. I really can't. So you go ahead and make a little bit of money while you're on the couch. Going into the new year, you're going to love it. But maybe you're still a little hesitant. New Year's Eve, you got the college football playoffs. New Year's Day, you got more college football playoffs. It's all on you. And you want to make some extra money. You've never done it before. Go to FanDuel.com. Put down a $5 bet. If it wins, you get $250 back in bonus bets. Now, that sounds like a way to start off 2025. Go to FanDuel.com and make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. We done gone through the DeSean Jackson hiring, DeShack, if that's what you want to call him. I don't think that sounds good. I think he would actually probably be offended to hear you call him DeShack. He would think you messed up his name. So let's not call him that. Let's call him D-Jax. Let's call him DeSean Jackson, or better yet, let's call him Coach Jackson. We went through all of that. And now we're going to get into our season in review of Delaware State. Like I said in my tease, it's not much to review. Expectation-wise, no one expected them to be that good. But I think they were worse than you expected. When you win one game, it's kind of like, okay, what are we doing? When you win one game, I don't care what your expectations are, you fail to meet them. Nobody steps into the year and says, we can win one game. Only pessimistic fans say that. Even like just general even keel fans say, maybe we get one here that we didn't expect. So only one victory. Lee Hall is out of there. I don't agree with the firing. Excuse me. I don't agree with the firing, but it is what it is. When you win 3 games, let me see. How many games did he win in his tenure? Not that it really matters, but overall, let's see. 2024, he won 1 game, and I think he won 2 games the year prior. Oh, no, he won 1 game both years. So, maybe that was the expectation to win 1 game this year. But anywho, you win 1 game, it's a failure. It's a failed season. You fire your head coach, it's a failed season. All of that, But there's only one guy to talk about in this. If you're not talking about Lee Hall and his firing, you're only talking about Jaden Sutton. At the end of the day, that running back, he was a really good running back. And he's the only player to make all conference on the team. First or second team, he was first team. But he was the only player to make all conference at Delaware State. He had 1,220 yards. That was good for topping the conference. He had 101 yards per game. That was only second to Jamari Taylor, who I think is pretty much looked at as the best running back in the conference. He was at 104. He played 1 less game. Delaware State had an extra game on their schedule, making it raising it up to 12. But I would also say, when we see some of these players who have high rushing yards or high receiving yards, just yardage totals in general, sometimes it's all based off of 1 game. That's not the case here. He had a few monster games. I'd probably say 2. The Campbell game and the South Carolina State game. But when you look at what he did in out-of-conference or in-conference play, he had 100 yards, 110 yards or more in every game but the Howard matchup. That's the only game that he didn't hit 110. He hit 50 in that game on 11 carries. So you're still looking at nearly 5 a pop, a little bit over 4.5, or a little under 4.5, I should say. So, oh no, a little over 4.5, a little over 4.5. I had my numbers wrong for a second. My math teacher's gonna kill me. But what makes it impressive to me is that he never really was a huge carry guy. He had a max of 22 carries in a game. Max. And there was multiple games he didn't get to 20, yet he was still getting to 100, which means he was consistently averaging 5 yards a pop. Every single game, he was averaging 5 yards a pop. You could argue that despite that stretch in MEAC play, his best game came against Campbell, in which he had 20 carries for 198 yards. Just narrowly missed his 10 per pop pace right there. But he also had 2 touchdowns. I would argue that is his best game. That is the game that I would point to because it was really close, it was competitive, and he had a huge output. The next argument would be South Carolina State. And in that game, he had 15 carries for 150 yards, and he had 3 touchdowns. So it's kind of like, all right, you actually hit the 10 yards a pop, minor difference, and you had an extra touchdown, but you had less yards on less carries. I would argue Campbell because honestly, what Sutton did against South Carolina State, the game was over by that time. He had a 72-yard touchdown, and they were down like 40, 50 points, something like 40 points, something like that. So to me at least, I'm going to go with the Campbell game. I'm going to go with the 20 carries for 198 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game that was extremely close and you felt like you could have won. That's when things were actually high for Delaware State at that time. But overall, that's it, man. Like there's no other star on this team. Defensively, at a high of 2 sacks, 6 tackles for a loss from an individual. Defensive back with your leading tackler. I hate when my defensive back's my leading tackler. That's one of my rules. If your safety is your leading tackler, either I need to see the style of defense you're running or it's a problem. And even then, I want my linebacker to be my leading tackler at all times. At all times. And I'll take a defensive lineman because that means you're going crazy if it's a good number, if it's a high number. But yeah, so Delaware State, it's not much to say about them in review. This is not a project that you're going to turn around fast. I hope that DeSean Jackson has his understanding of what he's stepping into. I really do. We'll see if he does. If he does or he doesn't, it doesn't matter. Either way, he's on the field. I can't wait to see. That Norfolk State versus Delaware State game just became prime time. And I can guarantee you it'll be on some sort of ESPN. And it's funny because those 2 teams were the 2 worst teams probably in the conference last year. And they're going to have a primetime game because it's Delaware State versus Norfolk State, and it's Michael Vick versus DeSean Jackson. That should be fun. Anyway, in the meantime, in between time, I'll see you next week. All right. Next week, we're going to look at Jackson State, unless Delaware State decides that they want to have their introductory press conference Monday morning or something like that. But other than that, that is going to be what we look at. So in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.